Does everyone have the topic beforehand? Or we can say it. Okay, I'll just say it.
Yes.
Okay, the USFG should impose sanctions on. Wait, sanctions on. Yeah, sorry, I don't have it. Okay, the USFG should impose sanctions on China in response to the to the Uighurs. To the treatment of Uighurs. Is that it?
Yeah, I think
In response to the treatment of Uighurs, yes. Okay. Sorry, one more time. USFG should impose sanctions on China in response to their treatment of the Uighurs. And that's spelled like Uighurs.
no.
Yes, is that it?
It's Uighurs, but that's not going to matter because
All right. Yeah, we're
this
talking
is
about
not
it,
because so we all know what you mean.
Okay, cool.
Okay, Sharon, I'm ready whenever you are.
Yes, Shannon is ready too. Okay. Okay. First, the resolution that the United States federal government should impose sanctions on crime in response to the treatment of the Uyghurs. Let's go over a couple of observations. First of all, that the definitions are contextual, but when we talk about the Uyghurs, we're talking about a Turkish ethnic group that is considered a minority within the entire region. So that's it. Basically, that is the ethnic group that we're talking about in response to the current treatment of what China is doing. So the second observation, this is a policy round, as the word should in the resolution implies a call to action. Therefore, we're going to be passing a plan and debating the implications of whether that plan is good or bad. Therefore, the judges should evaluate this based through net benefits whichever team can prove to be the most societal welfare for the most amount of people will win the round. Third observation is the plan text. So the United States federal government will impose sanctions on the sales of surveillance technology used by Chinese security agencies. Again, the United States federal government will impose sanctions on the sales of surveillance technology used by Chinese security agencies. It's going to be as soon as possible and through normal means. The solvency, let's discuss what exactly are these sales of surveillance. So first of all, you can see that these are very, very key to what the Chinese actually do in response to how they treat this ethnic group. For example, you can see here that the Chinese officials basically use United States parts, 13% of which are dependent upon the United States to create surveillance technology that they actually use to survey faces and determine whether or not they are a Uyghur, and then they take this type of technology and create re-education camps to send these people to. So you can see that there is a precedent of solvency with this specific type of sanction. For example, in 2014, they had a precedent of we were basically threatening the Chinese, but by sanctioning their cybersecurity systems in the same manner under Obama, you can see that Chinese firms and also companies were really, really afraid because they thought that business confidence was going to decrease, and they actually relied on a lot of United States parts since then. For example, DNA sequencing, voice identification systems, facial recognition cameras, all of this stuff was within the policy, and they actually curbed to United States influence. So that is why, at this point, we are going to be seeing that this is the most effective type of sanction to do this plan. The first advantage is going to be about human rights. On the uniqueness level, you can see right now that Uyghurs are treated as a minority. There are exactly 1 million, not exactly, but approximately 1 million Uyghurs imprisoned in camps around China. You can see they're actually put into re-education programs that basically erase the amount, they cannot speak their own native language, and they're distancing themselves from their religion, which is causing a lot of cultural genocide to the whole ethnic group. That basically means that we're not going to be able to see this type of group anymore within China, and it's really important to note that there are only around 1 million people, so they basically have the entire ethnic population, and they're literally genociding them. You can see that there's a lot of favoritism and physical violence when there are racial protests between Chinese officials and the actual ethnic group. You can see that this actually angers the Uyghurs when the Chinese civilians see this type of violence, which means that there is even more discrimination on a micro level, which makes independent Chinese civilians more polar. Which means that the second uniqueness point is that security agencies are used to actually monitor these Uyghurs, which is why our plan has a propensity to work, which means that China wants to keep this system because the United States has used this as a bargaining chip in the past, such as in 2014. There's a reason for why, when we are threatening to take this type of system away that is used to survey and actually keep track of all of this 1 million people, that China is going to accept this. So on the plans, first of all, China is going to comply with the sanctions, again, cross apply that they have been precedent in 2014. But second of all, this is going to increase the perception of the United States legitimacy. This opens up discussions about improving talks about intelligence. The fact that we literally have a trade war right now is not really opening up discussions because of the fact we're not doing anything to decrease the amount of power that the Chinese have in terms of their surveillance system, so they're not listening to us, which means probably have more negotiation tactics when we have these types of sanctions. But third of all, we can prevent genocide. Obviously, when there's an eraser of culture, when China stops doing this, when they're stopped by using this technology, and they cannot replace these parts, that is what's very key. The United States provides 13% of these parts, and those are like the very microchips that they cannot replace in terms of blueprints, which means that we're preventing genocide when they can no longer survey them. This is really, really good solvency, which means in terms of impact, first of all, we prevent dehumanization. Dehumanization is extremely bad because it causes, because cultural genocide is possibly the same thing as extinction. Once you erase an ethnic group, they basically can, there's nothing left for them to procreate, and this makes this impact basically irreversible, which is really bad in terms of probability, but also in terms of magnitude. If we're getting rid of an entire population, that probably has something that's very, very bad, because we no longer, we create an us versus them situation where we have absolutely no value to life towards people who are literally other human beings. The second advantage is about US-China relations. The uniqueness is that right now, China depends on the United States parts for surveillance technology. Yes, exactly 13% of the irreplaceable parts, which means that everything else can be complementary and be done in China, but the actual blueprint and the microchips are what the United States are giving to them, which means this is really key to things like military operations, making sure that surveillance is happening there, but also cameras, facial recognition. They're literally surveying their own Chinese citizens. And you can see that the 3 biggest AI companies are based in the United States, so China doesn't really have a monopoly on this sector yet, and they don't really expect to, because they've been depending on this for around a decade now, which means that second of all, in the uniqueness, cooperation is not happening right now between China and the United States. You can see that in June, the U.S. Security Review Panel met with other officials, international officials, but they didn't meet with China tech advisors, which means that which means that we have basically a bargaining chip with China. You can see that China has actually increased its amount of hacking IPO attacks since these bad relations, because they view the United States as locking them out, and they're actually kind of afraid that they're losing this technology. So when the plan passes, you can see that China really, really values its cyber technology, which means that they're going to be listening to the United States when we say that we're not be getting their irreversible parts anymore, which means that Chinese investors will want this access to technology. This happened in 2014, which means that they will curb to United States power again. The second link, I'll take you at the very end. The second link is that we will have a freezing effect on the specific types of bad technology. For example, facial recognition is actually very racist in that it only can look towards people who have lighter color skin, which means that we're actually causing a perception of changing the way that we use technology in the first place. But third link is that we spill over. The fact that we had no negotiations in the past in 2014 means we are probably going to be more able to have trade talks with them when we have a bargaining chip that China cannot back down from. And the fourth is that there is a precedent for this. When the fact that the U.S. sanctioned Chinese hackers in 2017, this meant that companies were literally trying to comply, which means that whenever cyber technology is at risk, that means that China has actually listened to us. It means the impacts in terms of cyber warfare has a really big impact on the economy. That $600 billion are lost from companies every year in the United States when China is trying to hack them, which is just a reason for why you're voting affirmative.
So the order is going to be an observation on their plan. Do you want another sheet for that?
Or is it solvency?
Just float it on your plan sheet.
Okay.
Yeah, so an observation on the plan, 2 off, and then on case. Oh yeah, also before I start my speech, yay, everyone for making it fun. Okay, with that being said, is everyone ready? Okay. So, an overview to their plan. The plan does not do anything about existing technology in this region. We see that right now,
there is enough surveillance technology for the continued oppression of minorities in China. It's only a question of whether the Chinese government is going to continue its oppression or whether they're going to collaborate with the United States and other international actors to actually stop this oppression. This violence is going to continue to exist unless we attack the root cause of why there is a specific targeting of Muslims in this region. And that is going to be xenophobia and racism, specifically caused by terrorism, and we'll get onto that later. So now going on to their plan. The first argument here is that, again, their plan doesn't take away these existing surveillance technology in the region. And China, according to Chinese officials, they've already identified a majority of the population that they want to put in these work camps, which means that their plan, isn't going to be able to fix any of the damage in the status quo. The second argument here is that the Secretary of State in the United States had talks with China in which they said that, if the United States threatens to sanction them, they're not going to change their policy at all because this shows off as perceptually weak. Instead, they're probably going to double down on their policy. The next argument here, this is going to be a turn on their case because we see that angering China is actually going to, again, increase the oppression of these minorities. The fourth argument here is that we see that China is probably just going to turn to other surveillance technology. We see that right now Russia and Chinese relations are increasing in status quo, and they say that only 13% of the parts that China is using are from the United States. That's because the majority of the rest are from Russia and other places, which means that, again, China is going to continue its oppression of this group. They're probably just going to turn to different kinds of surveillance technology. Now moving on to, the first, So the first DA is going to be that of Chinese backlash. Currently, the exploitation of Uighurs is managed by a rogue faction of the Chinese government. This is really important today. It's a rogue faction of the Chinese government. While Xi Jinping has not commented on the situation, there has been some internal resistance within the Chinese government. The second argument here is that, according to the BBC, sanctions will only cause this political faction to backlash. We see that when government officials feel economically threatened, they're more likely to send minorities to work camps. Currently, thousands of Muslims are being detained in work camps, including mines and manufacturing centers. The links here are that when the plan passes, targeted officials backlash, and we send more minorities to these work camps. And in terms of the impacts, we're going to see, again, the death and dehumanization of tens of thousands of people in these work camps. Because, again, we see that there's going to be Chinese backlash. Okay, with that, the counterplan. The United States federal government should collaborate with China on a counterterrorism campaign in the Xinjiang province. Again, the USFG should collaborate with China on a counterterrorism campaign in the province that Ryan said. Okay, so a couple of arguments under solvency here. Again, we see that, the first argument here is that Xi Jinping has repeatedly noted that he wants to engage in an anti-terrorism initiative. China looks to the United States to help, again, because they haven't perfected strategies in terms of dealing with these,
Yeah, question. When you say counterterrorism, do they currently view these ethnic minorities as terrorists? Are you suggesting that we cooperate with them to keep on pushing them into the periphery?
No. So basically, we see that there have been violent attacks in this region, and that's why China is using that as an excuse to continue its oppression of these minorities. So by solving for this violence in this region, that makes sure that China doesn't have an excuse to continue oppressing these people because they think that they are terrorists. Okay, so continuing on, we see that China also wants access to surveillance, again, technology that the United States has. So this is going to be important in terms of partnerships. Okay, the next argument here is the distinction between this rogue military faction and the actual Chinese government. So we see that even if their plan passes, and we see that the Chinese government doesn't have access to all this surveillance technology, we're seeing that a lot of the backlash being done is actually by this rogue military faction. And the counterplan is going to be able to solve because, again, we're solving for a lot of violence in this region. Furthermore, we see that our counterplan is net benefits competitive because the plan is something that's really aggressive against China, and the counterplan is something that's really collaborative. So, it's net benefits competitive. Okay, now moving on to their first advantage of human rights.
You can first cross-apply all of the solvency arguments I make on their plan because, yeah, that takes out a lot of their like scenarios there. Furthermore, we see that a lot of the homes of these Muslims are being searched within their own communities and not specifically through surveillance. And again, like the plan literally solves for nothing at the point where China is already using surveillance technology from other governments. Just the United States increasing taxes isn't a strong enough link to the point where like it's going to solve for all these human rights violations. So at the end of the day, the only effort that's going to work is if the United States collaborates with China. If the United States collaborates with China, the United States has more authority in terms of how they're going to actually be approaching this crisis, which means that you're probably going to be solving for more human rights in that world. Now moving on to their second advantage on U.S. and China relations. First, you can cross-apply our DA about China backlash, where we specifically tell you that the Chinese government does not want this plan to be passed. There's not going to be like better relations in a world where China specifically has said that they do not want us sanctions to be passed on them. Furthermore, we see that China already has its own cybersecurity companies. At the point where almost all of our surveillance technology is outsourced to factories in China. So I don't know where my opponents got this claim that all cybersecurity companies that China uses are in America. We see a majority of them are actually in China, which means that there's always going to be continued oppression of these minorities at the point where China already has the technology to do so. So at the end of the day, you're going to be voting for the negative for a couple of reasons. You see that the affirmations plan does nothing except anger China. The surveillance technologies that they have already exist, and that is enough to again continue oppressions of people in the region. If anything, the plan just causes China backlash, and the counter plan is going to be able to solve for a lot of the problems in the status quo. For those reasons, I strongly urge you to vote for the campaign.
So the order is going to be the affirmation case in order, with the observation solvency block stuff first, and then neg case counterplan first, backlash second. Is everyone ready? Time starts now. Starting right off with their observation on the topic case. They basically bring up that we do nothing about existing technology. However, we have a couple responses here. The first response is that a lot of this technology is on expiration dates, so they're basically running out of stock. You can look towards my partner's analysis about irreplaceable things like blueprints and microchips that China is unable to access with their current technology and unable to access elsewhere because, again, these parts are irreplaceable and come exclusively from artificial intelligence companies within the United States. The second response here is that China doesn't have any method of actually replicating any of the stuff that we've given them in the past because they simply don't have the technical capabilities. They're constantly used to buying artificial intelligence from the 5 biggest corporations within the United States, and they don't have the technology, they don't have the science, they don't have the money to actually put into this technology. Next, they say we have to do the same where we have to address the root cause of the issue, which is terrorism. However, we'd like to argue that it doesn't really matter what the root cause of the issue is as long as there's actually material solvency, right? And additionally, saying that the root cause is just terrorism is probably not true because China is going to oppress these minorities whether or not there is terrorism existing and whether or not they can use it as an excuse because they see them as a minority that doesn't deserve the status of a human being within China, meaning that their counterplan doesn't have any solvency for that issue either. The next response they make is that they already identified people, so it doesn't really matter. A couple responses here. First of all, it doesn't matter if they've already identified people because they're literally using these surveillance cameras to watch these people in their re-education camps. This is a massive dehumanizing policy that they've decided to undertake because they're literally watching these people as they go about their everyday lives. That's super, super bad. But the second response here is that they'll still be able to find new people with the different types of facial recognition technology that the U.S. is directly importing there, meaning that there's always a risk that we're able to decrease the amount of people who could be sent to these re-education camps in the future, meaning you have to vote affirmation on risk of solvency. Your next response here is that China says it won't back down. We have a couple responses to this. The first response is that they're just saying that they're not going to back down. Of course, China's not going to be like, oh yeah, we're just going to bow down to the US. Obviously not. They're going to say this, but in reality, they are going to back down. You have to look at their material actions and two specific precedents that we've provided for you already. In 2014, just threatening that we take away this artificial intelligence technology forced China to back down. In 2017, when we actually sanctioned their cyber technology, whatever, they actually decreased their hacking. Yeah.
Specific officials.
Yeah, specific things. Like they actually decrease their hacking on like U.S. companies, meaning that even if China says one thing to grandstand, they're always going to back down when the material threats actually happen. So that also like refutes their turn about like doubling down, I guess. Their next response here is that China is going to turn to other surveillance technology. The first response here is that Russia and like the one country that referenced Russia cannot replace this key 13% because once again these parts are uniquely from the United States. The second response here is that Russia's economy is not doing that well either because it's being sanctioned by the UN and by the UK and by the US, meaning that they don't have the like the power, the money, or the time to like give China these like hyper-specific technology. The third response is again, there's no precedent for this. In 2014 and 2017, China didn't just turn to Russia and resolve everything, meaning that yeah, we do have solvency. On to our first advantage about human rights. You can extend the entirety of our uniqueness story where we talk about how these people specifically are already in prison and how articulating that sanctions are in direct response to the Uighurs' detainment means that China has a likelihood of actually stopping this detainment in the first place. Meanwhile, only stopping terrorism doesn't actually cause the US to like speak out or stand out about the issue of the detainment of the Uighurs, meaning that that's never going to cause material change to the issue. It's only going to mask the issue. These people are still going to be in these camps. Maybe you stop terrorism, but these people are still being dehumanized. On the link level, their only response here is like, there's no solvency, but I've already answered like all of their solvency answers. There's like always going to be a risk that the affirmation team is able to solve, so you should vote for us on that. Additionally, they talk about how they still have other tech and like taxes aren't enough. Cross-apply the 2014 and 2017 precedent that says that sanctions on technology are enough. Additionally, you can extend our second link about how we increase perception of U.S. legitimacy. This is something they can't access with their counterclaim because this shows that we are uniquely speaking out on the issue of human rights. This also means we have a higher magnitude impact because it spills over to like other nations, right? Because our perception matters on a global scale, and increasing communication and talk between us and China means we are able to prevent stuff like this from happening in the future. So we also solve on issues of time frame. Yeah, so on the impacts, extended dehumanization and cultural genocide leads to like getting rid of values. Like this is something they can't solve for, even if they do solve for terrorism. And we'd argue this is the biggest impact in the round because you're literally erasing these people's identities and culture from existence. On to our second advantage about U.S.-China relations. Their one response here is China backlash, so I'm going to answer backlash on backlash, but they also said that China already has the technology. You can extend or uniqueness point 2A, where we talk about the 5 biggest AI companies in the United States are the ones responsible for this technology, and China doesn't have access to that. This is why our sanctions are uniquely key, and they're not like the steel and aluminum tariffs or whatever that Trump has proposed in the past, which means that we are the ones specifically attacking the mechanisms that China is using to detain these people and track these people in the first place. Additionally, extend what my partner says about how China only has complementary parts anyway, meaning they're just going to have a lot of incomplete cameras that sit around and collect dust and do nothing. So yeah, we are able to resolve this issue now. You can also extend all of our warrants in the uniqueness level where we talk about how there's no cooperation now. It means their China backlash disadvantage has literally no uniqueness whatsoever because we already isolate that our relations are so bad. There's always going to be a risk that the United States can improve these relations. Yeah. You can also extend, jump down to links. Extend our link about how this causes a chilling effect on the type of technology that is specifically used because we show that we're taking a stance away from it. This also means we get higher magnitude impact because we're actually able to stop and like step away from the use of super racist facial identification technology. It means we have access to better, more high magnitude impacts. Additionally, on the issue of like hacking and cyber warfare, this means we also access higher magnitude impact because of the fact that $600 billion really damages the economy, which gives us direct links to poverty within the United States. 1 year in poverty takes away 7 years in a person's life. This means we're able to access structural impact in both China and in the United States. Let's move on to their case. On the counterclaim. The first argument on the counterclaim is going to be that of the permutation. What this means is that the United States federal government can sanction the surveillance technology and simultaneously collaborate with China for anti-terrorist operations in the Xinjiang province. So the reasons why this permutation works a little under this is that technology is the internal link to collaboration. You can look to all of our warrants about how in the past, when we have forced their hand in terms of technology, this puts them to the bargaining table on issues like the military in the first place. So we always have to come first. The B argument here is that collaboration is impossible without sanctions forcing their hand. China is not going to be completely open and like welcoming with the U.S. on issues of anti-terrorism when they've never done that before. So we need to push them first with a plan in order to make that have solvency. Next, when they talk about how they're like violent attacks used as justifications, as I already said, on the topic case, China doesn't need an excuse. They literally just see these people as not Chinese and therefore less than human, meaning that they have no solvency when it comes to the actual detainment and dehumanization of this population. And additionally, they also don't have solvency because China can always go back on their word when we're having these collaborations because China really doesn't care what the US does if there's no ramifications for their actions on the hands of the United States. Also, you can turn their counterplans really bad because China has knowledge of like the local grounds and whatever. They can use that knowledge to trick the United States and force them to help them actually oppress these people in the first place. The second turn is that collaboration is going to kill U.S. perception because we're literally seen as bolstering a country that is like genociding a whole group. Onto the backlash disadvantage. The first argument here is that this is completely non-unique. Relations are already really bad. We're literally in a trade war right now, and we're also struggling over the South China Sea because the U.S. literally just sent like a carrier to the Taiwan Strait. This means that our relations are bad. There's only a risk that we force China to back down. Additionally, when they talk about how there's like a rogue faction, this is not a rogue faction. The only reason why Xi hasn't spoken is because he doesn't want to be implicated, but he's literally the general secretary of the Communist Party, and it's a one-party system, meaning that this rogue faction doesn't have any power, just sanctioned by the government. So on the link level, when we talk about how they're sending minorities, we can turn this argument, only the status quo is going to increase the power of rogue factions because there's literally no check back to their actions, which is what is happening right now. So only an affirmation plan has a risk of solving the disadvantage. Vote aye.
So order will be overview, so you can just throw that on the previous page that we're going to plan on. And then the first advantage on human rights and second advantage on US-China relations, and then our counter plan and our disadvantage. So I'm going to use that. The fatal flaw that my opponents make in today's debate is they simply don't understand how right now the Xinjiang province is technically its own autonomous region in China. What this means is that the Xinjiang province has much more autonomy and is much more separate from Xi Jinping's government. Because they don't understand this distinction, we are going to be winning today's debate when we tell you that right now a rogue governmental faction is the one that's carrying out these killings. They completely drop our word on how we tell you that Xi Jinping's government, there's already some internal resistance that is trying to force these oppressive people to stop the oppression of Uyghur people. We've already told you that Xi Jinping wants the United States to help step in and help stop this oppressive faction from making China look perceptibly bad in the global community. Also, you can also extend their award on how we tell you that because the Xinjiang province is especially close to Russia right now, we see that the specific surveillance technology that province uses all directly comes from Russia. We see that the surveillance technology that the U.S. is providing to China, that's being used for traffic stops, that's being used to monitor police violence, that's being used currently positively by the Chinese government to making sure that Chinese civilians aren't being repressed by other governments. Sorry, I have a lot to get through. Aren't being oppressed by the government. So when we're cutting away this good surveillance technology, that means that you're only going to be worsening what's going on in this very distant province right now, because not only will China not be able to actually surveil whether or not this rogue faction is continuing to crack down on these people, but you'll also see that the other people there will continue to use Russian technology, which means that their plan will not be solid for anything. So, yeah.
Yeah, so you talk about how the province is an autonomous region and she wants the U.S. to step in to stop this oppression. If this is true, then why would China backlash at all in a way that would have material impact?
Our disadvantage is specifically talking about how the rogue government there is going to backlash even more. Yeah. So next we see that. So again, they try to mischaracterize that the root cause of this problem is terrorism, but we see that the reason why China is not stepping out right now is because it has never handled a situation like this before. China has very deep-rooted fears about whether or not there is terrorism going on in the region right now, and because Xi Jinping doesn't exactly know how to approach the situation, he seeks to the United States for guidance, because we've dealt with terrorism in the Middle East before, which means that we have perfected strategies and perfected approaches that Xi Jinping really wants to utilize his own advantage. The reason why he's not stepping into that province right now is because he simply doesn't know how to approach the situation, and he doesn't want to lose legitimacy, because if that rogue faction is able to topple any efforts that he extends into the area, that's going to kill his legitimacy. They say that China is going to back down, but we see that right now we see that China is not just simply going to back down to these sanctions. Instead, they'll only levy sanctions against us, because we see that China is emboldened by Trump's chaotic administration right now. And we see that earlier trade wars, and we see that China has already upstarted China's has already upstarted China's tech sector. They tell you that themselves that we sanctioned China's tech sector before. That's what allowed China's tech sector to become this booming industry. We said 99% of all the technology in the United States is outsourced to be manufactured in Chinese factories. So China already has the blueprints. Whatever advantages you try to claim off of that are going to be non-unique in today's debate. So now onto the first advantage of human rights. They tell you that we're going to be masking the issue, but no, we're solving for the irrational fear that Xi Jinping has right now. We see that if we're actually stepping in to actually help Xi Jinping coordinate an actual strategized attack against terrorism and going on and the rampant violence going in that area, that means he's going to be much harder down and cracking down on this rogue faction government, which means we're going to be solving for the entirety of their human rights advantage. Furthermore, they see that we're going to be increasing U.S. legitimacy, but we see that sanctioning other countries, especially when it's not going to do anything, actually decreases our legitimacy. We see that right now a lot of Southeast Asian countries are actually scared of our sanction and our economic policy towards Asia. So if we take this move, that's not actually going to be solving for any human rights violations, but instead going to collapse China's positive tech sector. That means that other countries are going to be very fearful of U.S. and not going to trust legitimacy as well, which means that we are going to be worsening trade ties in their affirmative world, which means that you're going to see lots of billions of jobs and money. Yeah.
Yeah, given that you said that in the past when we've sanctioned China, which caused their tech sector to boom, why are you saying now that China's tech sector will collapse, which will scare these other Southeast Asian countries?
Because we see that right now, especially when we're taking away raw materials and stuff like that, then they're like, without raw materials and technology, the tech sector won't be able to flourish. So on to the second advantage of U.S.-China relations. We see that, again, they try to tell you how the 5 biggest AI companies are specifically controlled by the United States, but we see that a lot of these companies already have manufacturing facilities in China, which means that China already has access to these blueprints. This advantage is not unique at all. They try to tell you that they're going to be stopping the surveillance technology, but judge, the specific surveillance technology that's being used in the Xinjiang province comes 100% from Russia, which means that even if you pass their affirmative plan, they're not going to be solving for anything, especially you're only going to see even more backlash from the rogue government in this region, because first, they're just going to be emboldened to even use this Russian surveillance technology even more. And they see that we're going to be increasing poverty, but if we're hurting domestic companies here, that's what's going to be driving more Americans into poverty. So now onto our counterplan. They try to make a permutation here, but we see that in their plan is very aggressive, whereas our plan is very collaborative, which means that perceptually China is going to be very confused, which means that it's not going to want to engage in both. We see that when we enact sanctions on China, China is only going to back down from engaging in our policy. Xi Jinping has already said that he wants a collaborative terrorist technique. Wants a collaborative terrorist organization. He's usually going to stick to his word, because when he doesn't follow through his word, he loses legitimacy in the global community. So we see that China right now is currently acting out of fear, and if we only antagonize them through sanctions, they're just going to further oppress these people and not listen to the United States and not listen to our pressures of having them to stop oppressing the Uyghur minority. So on to our first disadvantage of Chinese backlash. They try to make this broad sweeping statement that relations are terminally low, but when at the point where we provide you several warnings where China wants to work with the U.S. on counterterrorism techniques, those are simply going to flow through. Furthermore, this specific point talks about how the rogue government officials there are going to backlash. Our opponents simply do not respond to this advantage at all, which means that you will just have to buy this disadvantage that these rogue government officials in the Xinjiang province are going to further crack down on the Uyghur minority. You can turn this disadvantage essentially turns their entire case, because when we see that those officials are losing power, that means that they're going to crack down even more on the Uyghur minority. So, for all those reasons, I urge a strong negative ballot.
Can I ask a
Yeah,
question?
one question.
Yeah. So, where exactly is this rogue faction getting the material and stuff necessary? Like, do they have to go through the actual government?
They're in Russia right now because it borders Mongolia and Russia. So they're like a really distant province of China. Yeah.
So, brief overview of the round. First, on their planned solvency, then going on to our CP solvency, then our US-China relations and Chinese backlash argument, and then the others. At the end of the day, it's really likely that China is just going to continue its oppression of Muslims in the region because A, they have the surveillance technology in China to do so, and B, because this specific province borders Russia, they're probably going to be able to get this technology from Russia as well. This means that the entirety of the affirmative case has no solvency. The only plan in this round that has any solvency at all is making sure that the rogue faction in this region isn't going to continue the oppression of Muslims. What this means is that you're always going to be looking to the counter plan because we see that the counter plan is going to be able to solve for this. So now going on to the counter plan. So the first argument here is that the root cause of all violence is because this rogue nation sees, they see violence going on in this region, and they assume that it's, the violence is tied to religion, and that's specifically why this rogue faction is oppressing people in this region. We see that, as Ryan said, surveillance technology, overall, saves lives in China. So we see that, this backlash that's going to happen because of the plan passing is going to lead to more anti-Muslim sentiment in the region, which is going to lead to an immediate loss of life, which is always going to come before the impacts of the affirmative at the point where they talk about how eventually there may be a decrease in surveillance technology. You're always going to look to this argument first because we see that this rogue military, this rogue faction in China is oppressing these groups in the status quo, which means that you're always going to be weighing this impact of lives being saved over the improbable and eventual impacts of the affirmative. Now going on to U.S. and China relations, we see that China wants the United States to work with them on this counterterrorism campaign. What that means is that there are arguments about how China doesn't want this don't apply, and our China China backlash dissad flows through. What this means, again, is it means it's going to turn the entirety of the affirmative case at the point where we tell you that these rogue military officials, specifically, are going to backlash when the plan passes. Backlash means that there's going to be an increased oppression of people in this region. So again, it's going to come down to which group, which approach you want to take in terms of diplomatic policy. The affirmative only further angers this group that is continuing to oppress people in this region, while the negation has the only policy in this round that's going to make sure that we see a decrease in violence in the region. When there's a decrease in violence, there's also going to be, again, a decrease in the amount of oppression that's going on. So on the Chinese backlash dissad, you can extend through our impacts where we specifically tell you that this rogue military faction is going to continue to oppress civilians if they are faced with any backlash. Again, this is going to be the most immediate impact of the round because saving lives right now is more important than what might happen when the sanctions and the specific plan is passed. More importantly, we're going to see that you can extend through a lot of our CP solvency as well, where we tell you that specifically the reason or the excuse that most people are giving to continue to oppress these groups is going to be solved only through the CP. Don't let them go through the perm because again, there's no way that you can both put sanctions on a group and also aim to collaborate with them. That probably isn't going to work. And they say that again, at the point where China wants a plan like our counter plan to be passed, that probably means the counter plan is more beneficial than the entirety of the affirmative. So at the end of the day, I was just talking about the negation. Thank you. Okay. Oh. The order is going to be second advantage, first advantage,
do the like overview plan stuff after the first advantage. So add 2, add 1, plan / solvency stuff, then CPDA. Okay. There are 3 different ways that you can vote for the affirmation in this round. First of all, that technology is the internal link to any collaboration with China. But second of all, that the status quo doesn't solve any type of human rights violations that are happening specifically against this ethnic group. But third of all, that the permutation can shield the link to the disadvantage. So there are 3 different routes that you can vote first. Let's go through the first one. First, that technology is the internal link to any type of collaboration. They can see the fact that China literally depends on the specific blueprint microchips, 13% of the irreplaceable parts. That means that even if Russia can, and Russia is in no position to be giving them any type of technology. We tell you that the rest of the tech is actually being developed by China, but they're only complementary parts, which means that there's no probability that Russia can actually go in because they already have that in place. But second of all, Russia is really bad in terms of the economy. They also have sanctions from the UN, and they also have sanctions from the US. So there's no probability that they can actually give the technology that this rogue state really wants. But even if China can make its own technology, it's a try or die for the affirmative team, because the counterplan can absolutely do nothing to decrease the amount of technology that is actually exacerbating and exploiting people in the status quo, which means that the technology that is specifically used to track and actually survey people in their re-education camps right now is only resolvable through the affirmation claim, which means that we have a high probability, or more of a risk of probability, because they don't interact with our 2 horns. That in 2014 we did this with the Obama administration, and the Chinese even backed down before sanctions were put in place. But in 2017, when we put sanctions on actual officials in terms of cybersecurity, they also backed down, which means we have 100% of probability with this. We also have a high magnitude impact, because we are literally affecting $600,000 of the economy of businesses that are being attacked because Chinese are not cooperating with the United States right now, which means that when we have a bargaining chip, we are very key to having this high magnitude impact. So that means that technology is the internal link to any type of collaboration with the United States, which means we control the internal link to any of their counterplan solvency, but I will get to that later. On to this first advantage about human rights. The overview on this is that there is a risk of us solving. That status quo, they concede that no one is helping these ethnic minorities, which means that when their counterplan is literally just looking towards counter-terrorism first, they will still use the excuse that they are masking the effect. They have this perception that they're solving with counterterrorism, but they will still find ways to exploit these ethnic minorities, even if they are still cooperating with the United States. We can see this, that is still happening, that since we have precedent with the Chinese backing down 2014, 2017, it means that there's a higher probability that we can actually solve for the human rights violations, which means that we have a higher magnitude impact in terms of legitimacy spilling over and they can see the fact that the Xi Jinping is literally a one-party system. The fact that he heads the entire state means that he controls the rogue state. He controls the fact that the military is out there and actually exacerbating and exploiting people, which means that if it's a one-party system, he would have been able to stop them, but he hasn't right now, because he wants the money. He wants to get rid of this ethnic minority, which means he would have already spoken out, which means there's absolutely no probability that there was 100% probability that we could solve this issue, because we forced Xi Jinping to cooperate with us, which means on the solvency sheet right now, the plan is able to solve. Couple reasons why that you can extend and cross-apply are 2 precedent warrants that sanctions can work, but that specifically about the blueprints technology, which means that even if there is a rogue state, the fact that they're able to get this technology from China in the first place, this rogue state will actually, they can see at our turn that the rogue government will actually backlash when they don't have access to technology, and when the United States is actually giving it to the party, that means that they're the ones that are giving technology to their actual military that are exacerbating these issues, which means that we control the internal link to solving for any types of human rights issues. So let's go on to the counterplan. The permutation is able to resolve 100% of it. They just only put defense that the permutation cannot happen for some reason, but it is totally probable that you can have sanctions on China and also collaborate with them in a counterterrorism effort. There is no functionality over here, but you can, which means that you can resolve the entirety of their disadvantage, which means that collaboration is impossible if the United States doesn't have a bargaining chip first, which means that the permutation is actually going to be the most probable way of solving for human rights disadvantages. Also, if you don't buy that, you can vote on the independent 2 pieces of office that Sharon reads, that there's no probability of solving these, because China knows the local grounds. The United States, when they go into that region, it will probably be there will be some misconception, and they'll actually be ending up attacking this ethnic minority in the first place. But second of all, that this cues in the United States perception when everybody sees that the United States is not actually actually working on deleting, getting rid of ethnic genocide, but instead focusing on counterterrorism, which is not even in the uniqueness right now, that probably means that there's an independent term there, which means that technology is the only internal link to collaboration, which is why they look towards our case first. On their disadvantage, there's no probability of happening for this. They can see that the non-unique, that relations are bad right now, and also they can see the one-party analysis, that the Xi Jinping doesn't really care about his own legitimacy. He only cares about advancing his own agenda, which is the reason for why he did speak out now. For those reasons, you vote out.